Every Wednesday morning at 6 o'clock, for the past 62 years, a man has visited Marilyn Monroe's grave. He arrives early, before the cemetery opens to the public, before the tourists come with their cameras, before anyone else is there. He walks to the grave marker, kneels down, places a single red rose, stays for exactly 3 minutes, then leaves. No words, no prayers said aloud, just silence, just the rose, just those 3 minutes. And then he's gone. For 62 years, every Wednesday without fail, this ritual has continued. The cemetery groundskeepers have seen him, watched him, wondered about him, but nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows why he comes. Nobody knows what Marilyn Monroe meant to him. Everyone knows about Joe DiMaggio's roses, the famous story, how Joe sent roses to Marilyn's grave 3 times a week for 20 years after she died. How he never got over her, how his love lasted beyond death. But this other man, this Wednesday morning man, his story is a mystery, and his roses have outlasted Joe's. 62 years. Every Wednesday, rain or shine, summer or winter, through recessions and pandemics, through personal tragedy and aging, this man has never stopped coming, never missed a Wednesday, except once, during the COVID lockdown in 2020, and even then he called the cemetery, asked them to place a rose for him, because he couldn't come, because the ritual had to continue, even if he couldn't be there in person. This is the story of the man who has loved Marilyn Monroe longer than anyone, the man whose identity remains a mystery, and the roses that have been placed on her grave every Wednesday for 62 years. Marilyn Monroe is buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. It's a small cemetery, tucked behind office buildings. Easy to miss if you don't know it's there. She's in a crypt, number 24. In the corridor of memories. Her marker is simple, just her name, Marilyn Monroe, and the years, 1926 to 1962. No epitaph, no quote, just her name. But her grave is never without flowers. Fans leave lipstick kisses on the marble, leave notes, leave photographs, leave flowers, so many flowers that the cemetery has to clear them away regularly, just to keep the area manageable. But among all those flowers, among all those tributes from strangers and fans, there is always one rose that stands out. One single red rose, perfect, fresh, placed with care. The Wednesday rose, the rose that has been coming every week since August 1962, since the week Marilyn was buried. The story of Joe DiMaggio's roses is well known. Joe and Marilyn were married in 1954, divorced 9 months later, but Joe never stopped loving her. When she died in 1962, Joe arranged her funeral, claimed her body, banned Hollywood from attending, made sure she was buried with dignity, and then for the next 20 years, Joe sent roses to her grave 3 times a week. Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, red roses. Always red. For 20 years, those roses came, until 1982, when Joe was in his late 60s and decided it was time to stop, to let go, to move on with whatever time he had left. Joe died in 1999, at age 84, and reportedly his last words were about Marilyn. "I'll finally get to see Marilyn." Joe's rose delivery service stopped in 1982, but the Wednesday roses, those never stopped, never slowed down, never changed. Every Wednesday, 6 a.m., one red rose, for 62 years, and counting. The cemetery workers noticed it early, as early as 1963, a year after Marilyn died. The groundskeepers would arrive for their morning shift, and there would already be a rose on Marilyn's crypt. Every Wednesday, like clockwork. At first they assumed it was Joe. Maybe Joe was coming on Wednesdays too. in addition to his regular Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday schedule. But then they started paying attention and realized the Wednesday roses came at a different time, earlier, before the cemetery officially opened, and the rose was different, not from the same florist Joe used. A different type of red rose, longer stem, different wrap. Someone else was coming, someone who wasn't Joe DiMaggio, someone who had his own ritual, his own schedule, his own reasons. By the 1970s, the groundskeepers started trying to catch glimpses of the Wednesday man, to see who he was. One worker named Frank made it his mission, started coming in early on Wednesdays, hoping to see the mysterious visitor, and finally, in 1974, Frank saw him, an older man, probably in his 50s, well-dressed, wearing a hat, walking slowly to the crypt, carrying a single rose wrapped in paper. Frank watched from a distance, saw the man kneel, place the rose, bow his head for exactly 3 minutes. Frank timed it. 3 minutes. Not 2, not 5, exactly 3. Then the man stood, walked back to his car, and drove away. Frank tried to see the license plate, but couldn't, tried to follow in his own car, but lost him in traffic. The mystery remained. In 1982, when Joe DiMaggio stopped sending his roses, some people assumed the Wednesday roses would stop too. Thought maybe they had been connected to Joe somehow, maybe a friend of Joe's, or someone Joe had hired. But the Wednesday roses continued, without interruption, without change, proving that whoever this was, it had nothing to do with Joe. This was someone else entirely, someone with his own connection to Marilyn, someone whose grief and love, and whatever else he felt, was separate from the famous Joe DiMaggio story. By the 1990s, the mystery of the Wednesday man had become something of a legend among cemetery workers. New employees would be told about him. Keep an eye out on Wednesday mornings. You might see him. The guy who's been coming since 1962. Some workers tried to talk to him. In the 2000s, as security cameras became more common, the cemetery installed cameras hoping to get a clear view of who this man was. But the man seemed to know about the cameras, started wearing a hood, or a hat pulled low, always kept his face turned away, deliberately hiding his identity, as if the anonymity was part of the ritual, as if being unknown was important to him. Carlos Martinez started working at Westwood Memorial in 1984. He was 25 years old, took a job as a groundskeeper while figuring out what to do with his life, and he's still there, 40 years later. Now the head groundskeeper, and in those 40 years, Carlos has seen the Wednesday man hundreds of times, not every week, but enough to recognize him, enough to notice that he's aged, that he walks slower now, that the man who was probably in his 50s in the 1980s is now in his 80s or 90s, still coming, still placing his rose, still keeping his 3-minute vigil. In 2005, Carlos decided to try talking to him. It was a Wednesday in October. Carlos was trimming hedges near Marilyn's crypt, saw the man approaching, older now, moving carefully. Carlos set down his tools, walked over as the man was placing his rose. "Excuse me," Carlos said softly. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've worked here 20 years. I've seen you come every Wednesday. I was wondering, are you family? Were you related to Miss Monroe?" The man looked at Carlos. His face was lined with age, eyes tired but kind. He smiled slightly. "She knew me," he said. "That was all. She knew me." Then he turned and walked away. Carlos didn't follow, didn't push, just watched him go. And that answer, vague as it was more than anyone else had ever gotten. She knew me, not I knew her, but she knew me, as if his identity mattered to Marilyn, as if he had been important to her in some way. But who was he? A lover? A friend? A colleague? Someone from her childhood? Someone from her final days? No one knew, and he wasn't telling. The Wednesday Roses continued through the 2010s. By now, the mystery had attracted attention beyond the cemetery. People who studied Marilyn Monroe's life knew about the Wednesday Man, wrote about him in articles, speculated about his identity. Some theories said he was Robert Kennedy, that he felt guilty about his relationship with Marilyn, about how it ended, about whether his rejection of her contributed to her death, and that he'd been coming every Wednesday for 60 years out of guilt and love and grief. But the timing didn't quite work. Robert Kennedy died in 1968, only 6 years after Marilyn. The Wednesday Roses continued for decades after that, so it couldn't be Bobby Kennedy, unless someone else took over his ritual, which seemed unlikely. Other theories said the man was a childhood friend, someone who knew Norma Jane before she became Marilyn Monroe, someone who remembered the girl she'd been, who wanted to honor that girl, who came every Wednesday because Wednesdays had meant something to them. Maybe Wednesday was the day they'd met, or the day she'd helped him, or the day something significant had happened between them. But no one from Marilyn's childhood came forward. No one claimed to be the Wednesday Man. The mystery deepened. Some people thought he might be a studio executive, or a director, or a producer, someone who had worked with Marilyn, who felt guilty about how Hollywood had treated her, how they'd used her, exploited her, contributed to her death, and who came every Wednesday as penance, as apology, as acknowledgement that he'd been part of the system that destroyed her. But again, no one claimed this identity, and by the 2010 Seth, most of the executives and directors who had worked with Marilyn were dead. If the Wednesday Man had been one of them, he would have had to be incredibly old by now, in his 90s at least, still able to make the trip every Wednesday, which seemed unlikely but not impossible. The most persistent theory was that the Wednesday Man was someone Marilyn had loved, someone she'd had a relationship with, secret or otherwise, someone who had loved her back, and who, after her death, had dedicated himself to this weekly ritual, as a way of staying connected to her, as a way of processing his grief, as a way of saying the things he never got to say when she was alive. Every Wednesday, 3 minutes, 1 rose, for 62 years. That was a love that went beyond anything public, beyond anything famous. That was private love, deep love, the kind of love that doesn't need recognition or acknowledgement from anyone else. Just the ritual, just the rose, just the remembering. In 2020, the COVID pandemic changed everything. Cemeteries were closed to visitors for months. Only essential personnel allowed. No public access. For the first time since 1962, the Wednesday Man couldn't come, couldn't place his rose, couldn't keep his ritual. Carlos Martinez was working at the cemetery throughout the lockdown, maintaining the grounds even though no visitors were allowed. And on the first Wednesday of the lockdown, Carlos noticed no rose on Marilyn's crypt. For the first time in his 40 years of working there, the Wednesday rose was missing. It felt wrong. The absence was noticeable, like something important had been broken. Then, on Thursday morning, the cemetery office received a phone call, an older man, voice weak but determined. "This is about Marilyn Monroe's grave," he said. "I place a rose there every Wednesday. I couldn't come yesterday because of the closure. Could someone, could someone put a rose there for me? I can have one delivered to the cemetery, or I can pay someone, but it needs to be there. Every Wednesday, it's been 60 years. I can't break the ritual now." The office manager was moved, told the man not to worry, that the cemetery would take care of it. The man sent money for a rose, had it delivered to the cemetery, and Carlos personally placed it on Marilyn's crypt on Wednesday. At 6 a.m., keeping the ritual alive, even though the man himself couldn't be there. For 3 months, during the lockdown, this arrangement continued. Every Tuesday, a rose would be delivered to the cemetery office. Every Wednesday, at 6 a.m., Carlos would place it on Marilyn's crypt, on behalf of the Wednesday man, keeping the 60-year tradition alive. When the cemetery finally reopened to visitors in June 2020, Carlos was working the Wednesday morning shift, and at exactly 6 a.m., he saw a car pull into the parking lot, saw an elderly man get out slowly, moving carefully, walking with a cane now, but coming nonetheless. Carlos watched as the man made his way to Marilyn's crypt, placed his rose, knelt down with difficulty, bowed his head for 3 minutes, then stood, with effort, and walked back to his car. Carlos wanted to talk to him, wanted to thank him for the money he'd sent during lockdown, wanted to tell him how much the ritual meant to the cemetery staff, how they'd made sure it continued even when he couldn't be there. But Carlos didn't, because he understood. The anonymity was part of it. The silence was part of it. Speaking would break something, so Carlos just watched, and felt honored to have been part of preserving this mystery. This love, this grief, this whatever it was that had lasted 60 years and continued still. In 2024, Carlos Martinez retired from Westwood Memorial. After 40 years of service, local news did a story about him, about his dedication to the cemetery, about the famous people buried there, and Carlos mentioned the Wednesday man. There's a man who's been coming to Marilyn Monroe's grave every Wednesday since 1962. Carlos said, 62 years. I've seen him maybe 200 times in my 40 years. He's old now, in his 80s at least, maybe 90s, but he still comes. Every Wednesday, 6 a.m., 1 red rose, 3 minutes, then leaves. I don't know who he is, nobody does, but I know this, whatever Marilyn Monroe meant to him, it's deeper than anything I've ever seen. Joe DiMaggio loved her, everyone knows that. Joe sent roses for 20 years, but this man, 62 years and counting, that's beyond love, that's devotion, that's dedication, that's a promise he made to himself or to her, and he's keeping it. Even as he ages, even as it gets harder, he keeps coming. The news story went viral. People were fascinated, started speculating again about who the Wednesday man could be. Some people claimed to know, said it was a relative, or an old friend, or a secret lover. But none of these claims could be verified, and none of them seemed quite right. Because if he was a relative or a known friend, why the secrecy? Why the anonymity? Why not just come forward and say who he was, and why he came? The secrecy suggested something else, something more complicated. Maybe he was married, and his wife didn't know about his connection to Marilyn. Maybe he was famous himself, and didn't want the attention. Maybe he had promised Marilyn something before she died, promised to visit her grave, to never forget her, to keep her memory alive in this private way, and he was honoring that promise, even decades after she died, even when he was the only one who remembered the promise, even when no one would know if he stopped. After Carlos's interview went viral, some people tried to stake out the cemetery on Wednesday mornings, hoping to see the Wednesday man, hoping to solve the mystery. But the cemetery put a stop to it, increased security, made it clear that disturbing visitors would not be tolerated. The Wednesday man's privacy would be protected, whether he wanted it protected, or whether he just never asked for protection. The cemetery decided to give it to him anyway, because what he was doing was sacred, was beautiful, was important, and it deserved to be left alone. As of November 2024, the Wednesday roses continue, 62 years. Every Wednesday, the man is still coming, even older now, moving even slower, but still there, still keeping his promise, still honoring whatever Marilyn meant to him, still placing his rose, still taking his 3 minutes, still maintaining the silence. The cemetery workers have a name for him now, not his real name, because they don't know his real name, but they call him the Faithful, as in, did the faithful come today? Yes, 6 a.m. Like always, the Faithful, because that's what he is. Faithful to Marilyn, faithful to his promise, faithful to the memory of whatever they shared, faithful in a way that most people can never be, faithful for 62 years, and counting. There's something profound about the Wednesday man's anonymity, about the fact that he has kept this ritual for 6 decades, without seeking recognition, without wanting credit, without needing anyone to know who he is or why he comes. In an age where everything is documented and shared and publicized, where grief is performed on social media and love is quantified by likes and shares, the Wednesday man's private devotion feels almost revolutionary. He's not coming for attention, not coming to be photographed, not coming to be part of the Marilyn Monroe mythology. He's coming because he needs to, because he promised, because he can't not come. And that purity of motive is rare, maybe rarer than the 62 years themselves. Who is he? The question remains unanswered, and maybe that's how it should be. Maybe the mystery is the point. Maybe the unknowing is what makes it beautiful. Because if we knew who he was, if we knew his connection to Marilyn, if we knew why he comes, then we would categorize it, fit it into a narrative. We understand. Oh, he was her lover. Oh, he was her friend. Oh, he was someone she helped. And in that categorizing, we would lose something. The magic of not knowing, the beauty of mystery, the space for imagination. As it is, the Wednesday man could be anyone, could represent anything, could mean whatever we need him to mean. He's the faithful lover, the devoted friend, the grateful beneficiary of her kindness, the guilty party seeking redemption, the man who loved her and never told her, the man who told her and never got to see what happened next. He's all of these and none of these. He's a mystery, and mysteries sometimes are more valuable than answers. What we do know is this. For 62 years, every Wednesday morning at 6 a.m., a man has visited Marilyn Monroe's grave, has placed a single red rose, has knelt for exactly 3 minutes, and has left without a word. Through presidents and wars and cultural shifts and technological revolutions and pandemics, this ritual has continued, unchanging, unwavering, a fixed point in a changing world. And as long as he's able, as long as he's alive, the Wednesday man will keep coming, will keep placing his rose, will keep his 3 minutes of silence, will keep his promise, whatever that promise is, to whomever he made it, whether to Marilyn or to himself, or to something larger than both of them. And someday the Wednesday man won't come anymore. Someday age or illness or death will stop him, and the Wednesday roses will end. 62 years, or 70, or however long he lasts. And when that happens, we'll never know who he was. Never know what Marilyn meant to him. Never know why Wednesday, why 6 a.m., why 3 minutes, why red roses, why anonymity. Never know any of it. The mystery will die with him, and all we'll be left with is the evidence. 60+ years of roses, 60+ years of a promise kept. And that will have to be enough. If this story makes you think about love differently, about devotion, about the promises we make and keep even when no one's watching, then subscribe for more stories about the human heart behind the headlines. Hit that like button if you believe the most beautiful acts are often the ones done in silence, and tell us in the comments, who do you think the Wednesday man is, and does it matter, or is the mystery the whole point? Sometimes the deepest love is the quietest. Sometimes the longest devotion is the most private. Sometimes the most beautiful tributes are the ones that never seek recognition. For 62 years, a man has loved Marilyn Monroe from the shadows, has honored her in silence, has kept his promise week after week after week, and we may never know who he is, but we know this: his roses have outlasted Joe DiMaggio's, his devotion has outlasted everyone's, and whatever Marilyn Monroe meant to him, it was enough to dedicate 62 years of Wednesday mornings to her memory. That's a love story, even if we don't know the details, especially because we don't know the details. Some love stories are meant to remain mysteries, and this one, the story of the Wednesday man and his red roses, might be the most beautiful mystery of all.